Hello my friends and fellow travelers, my name is Pierce, this is my channel Tales from the Road. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today we're talking about Lithuania, and more specifically its beautiful and historic capital city of Vilnius. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know before you go, so stick around to get all the details for your next trip to Vilnius. If that sounds good, let's get Lithuanian. As we always do with these videos, let's start with a little historical and geographic context so we can get to know Vilnius a little bit better before we go. So Vilnius is the capital of Lithuania, and Lithuania is a small country located in the northeastern part of Europe in the Baltic zone, with Latvia to its north, the strange Russian exclave of Kaliningrad to its west, Poland to its south, and Belarus making up a large portion of its border to the east. The Baltic region of Europe has always been a very mixed place, with lots of influences from the Russian speakers and Slavs to the east and to the south, as well as the Germans and other Baltic seafaring nations to the west and to the north. So the story of Vilnius goes back quite a long period of time. The city was founded in the 14th century as a center for trade, for merchants, and a lot of different people in the greater Lithuanian-speaking society. The Lithuanians themselves are ethnically a bit of an outlier in the region, while only them and the Latvians speak sort of a Baltic language that is very different than the Finnish and Estonian languages to the north, and then the greater Slavic languages that surround them. Since its founding in the 14th century, Vilnius started building up relevance on the Eastern European stage, and sort of began to reach its height when Lithuania and Poland decided to start a commonwealth at the end of the 16th century. This commonwealth became a big buffer state and trading partner between the Russian Empire to the east and the Germanic city-states to the west. During this time, Christian architecture and other Renaissance influences really developed the old city center of Vilnius and created a pretty good-looking city that still remains to this day. After the Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth collapsed, the majority of Lithuania, including Vilnius, got absorbed into the Russian Empire. And they wouldn't get another chance at independence until the early 1900s, 1918 to be exact, right after World War I, and of course the fall of the Russian Empire. After World War I, the Lithuanians recognized Vilnius as their capital city, although Poland ended up occupying it from 1920 to 1939, and then of course the Nazis entered Poland in 1939, and then it became this territory in between the two massive powers that were taking over everything around it, the USSR to the east, and the German Empire to the west. The identity of this historic city was really at risk during World War II because nearly 40% of the residents were Jewish. During the Nazi occupation, the majority of the Jews were sent to concentration camps, and then the subsequent Soviet occupation sent lots of Lithuanian nationals all over the Soviet Union to labor camps and gulags as well. That means that the Lithuanian identity was suppressed and deeply damaged, and then with the occupation of the Soviet Union in Lithuania until 1991, they had to figure out how to preserve this Lithuanianness, with Vilnius being that important city. That being said, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Lithuania did get its independence. They did get their capital city, Vilnius, back established, and 30 years later, it's a modern European Union country that uses the euro, that has lots of good tourism, lots of good things to offer, and that's really trying to build itself as one of the coolest places in Europe that you can visit. Whew, all right, that was a lot of history, but it's really interesting, and if you like traveling, history is always a good thing to learn because it sort of gets you on the flow of understanding the place that you're visiting. Also, if you're enjoying the video to this point, make sure to like and subscribe before we get into the practical information. All right, so let's start with visas. Vilnius and Lithuania in general are in the Schengen zone, which is the greater free trade and free movement zone of the European Union. That means you get 90 days in Lithuania in general. Could spend 90 days in Vilnius, but that means that if you go to any other European country that's in the Schengen zone, it's going to subtract from the time that you have in Lithuania. Always something to remember when you're traveling in the European Schengen zone space. Money. In 2015, the Lithuanians joined the Eurozone, and that means they use the euro. The euro right now trades at about $1 equals 95 euro cents, so pretty close. So it's almost 1-to-1, give or take a little bit, that the euro is a bit stronger. Is Lithuania expensive? That's a good question. For the average American tourist, no. For the average Lithuanian, probably. And I'm sure it's gotten worse because Central and Eastern Europe has had a lot of bad issues with inflation, specifically since COVID. I remember the first time I visited Lithuania was in like 2017, and I've been there I think 3 or 4 times since then. It's a really good place, Vilnius. But I was out with a local getting some drinks, and he was telling me that basically when 2015 happened, everything just doubled in price. Like the second they entered the euro, you know, you got a piece of bread, it was $1, now it was $2, and so it got very expensive for Lithuanians. I'm sure it's caught up, but in general, the salary versus the cost of living for the average Lithuanian is probably pretty tough. So be aware of that. It might be a good deal for you, but maybe not for them. That being said, if you're staying in a hostel or a cheap hotel, probably budget 25 to 50 euros per night. If you're staying in Vilnius, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, not for the hostel, but maybe for the hotel. And if you're staying outside, like in generalized Lithuania, of course, it's going to be a bit cheaper. You could, of course, go to Kaunas, which is the second city. It's going to be a bit cheaper than Vilnius, but hotel prices are sort of equalized across the larger cities of the country. If you want to stay in a mid-range hotel, probably plan on 80 euros to about 120, and anything over that is going to be a luxury hotel, which will go really far, and you'll get some really nice stays in Vilnius for sure. Remember that the high season in Vilnius is definitely going to be from June to early September, just because it's really cold in Lithuania the majority of the year. The other time that might be a bit more expensive is during Christmas, because they have nice Christmas markets that you can visit in the city center, of course. Transportation. Getting to Vilnius, you're probably going to fly into VNO, the Vilnius International Airport. They have a lot of flight connections with like Air Baltic and some of the secondary air providers. It might be a little bit expensive to fly there, and if it is, you can fly to Riga, Latvia, which is typically cheaper because they own Air Baltic, and it's about a 5-hour bus ride to Vilnius. Vilnius is also about an 8-hour bus ride from Warsaw, so it depends if you're doing a big Eastern European trip, that's possible. If you just want to fly to Vilnius, you can of course just fly to Vilnius. Once you're in Vilnius, the city center of the city, like the old town, isn't particularly huge, so you can walk most of it, but if you don't want to walk the entire city all day, there's a couple different options. They have trams and buses that are nicely interconnected throughout the city. A ticket is about €1.50. You can also use Uber and Bolt, which is reasonably inexpensive by American standards to take you pretty much anywhere you want to go in the city. The vibe in Vilnius in general is very chill. It's not a huge city, so getting around isn't such a hassle. A lot of younger Lithuanian people, and older Lithuanian people for that matter, speak English, so getting around isn't that challenging. And they've got a lot of tourist information and a good tourist infrastructure, so it's pretty easy to visit the city without getting too deep into the confusion of Lithuanian society. Vilnius also isn't particularly far from the rest of the things in the country, because the country itself isn't that big. You can go to Kaunas, which is the second city, in about a couple hours, and then you can go all the way to the coast of the Baltic Sea to a city called Klaipėda, which is the gateway to this sort of sandbar that is very uniquely interesting, that's definitely worth a visit if you like nature travel, and that's about 4.5 hours, 3.5 hours from Vilnius. All right, now on to my favorite section, which is food. I think Lithuanian food can be lumped into the general Central and Northeastern European basket, kind of similar to Polish, similar to Russian and Belarusian. You're going to find a lot of the similar dishes. But that being said, the one thing that you can find in Lithuania that you don't really find in other countries are cepelinai. Cepelinai are basically like potato dumplings that are shaped like a zeppelin, which I think it's why it's called that. I don't speak Lithuanian, but I'm assuming. And they're filled with meat, and then they have sort of a cream and bacon sauce over the top. The food in Lithuania is super heavy, but super good. So definitely give that a try. That's like the national dish. They also have a dish called šalti barščiai. I believe that's right. And this is typically a kefir and beet soup, very similar to borscht, except cold and sort of summery. Actually, this last year I saw on social media that they had a festival that was dedicated to this much beloved and very vibrantly pink soup. There were many vendors who came and they sort of had a tournament to see who was making the best one. So definitely put that on your list. The last one that you can try is something called kibinai, which is sort of like a bread item typically filled with meat or dumplings, depends on the version that you're gonna get in each part of the country. This is something you just eat with a beer or eat on the go or eat before a meal or something. Definitely worth trying, filling, hearting, delicious. All right, so now I'm gonna tell you the top things to do in Vilnius and some things that I really enjoyed when I was there. So any trip to Vilnius starts with a trip to the Old Town. And the Old Town is stunning. It's beautiful. It has very nice sort of Baroque Catholic churches. It's got really beautiful sort of like Russian influenced, Central European influenced just buildings, and the architecture is very regal. It's like very fancy. One thing I did that was very interesting in the city center was a Jewish Old Town tour. Obviously 40% of the population was Jewish before 1945, and so there's a lot of remnants, old buildings, synagogues, destroyed synagogues, museums, all related to the Jewish story of Vilnius. Vilnius was also a central hub of Bolshevist thinking, so it was a very important part of the big change in the Russian Empire, and a lot of the cast of characters that were important for the Bolshevik Revolution were actually living in Vilnius and sort of spreading that ideology from there, which you can also learn about in the various museums that they've got in the city. Next, after you've eaten, drinking, walked around the old town, enjoyed maybe a museum or two, you can head up to the hill that overlooks the old town called Gediminas Castle Tower. Gediminas was basically one of the founders of Old Vilnius. Up there, they built a nice sort of red brick tower. You get a really cool sight because there's a river, there's the old town, and then there's the new town with skyscrapers and the new infrastructure, and you can kind of see both. And it's where the city started, so you get the really old, the old but relatively new, and then you get the brand new modern side of Vilnius. If you want to hike up to an even higher monument, you can go to the Three Crosses Monument, which are 3 massive crosses that they put on top of it's not a small mountain, but it's a large hill as well. And you get an even better view of the entire area of Vilnius. The last thing you can do in Vilnius, which is kind of funny and quirky, is a visit to the Republic of Užupis, which is a de facto independent republic neighborhood of Vilnius. You can see their constitution, you can get a passport stamp saying that you've been to this republic. They actually have a cool art gallery, and they have a nice cafe. So it's definitely worth a quick stop because it's part of the pride of the city and something that's just kind of goofy, and why not? If you have an extra day, I would definitely recommend hopping on a bus and going to the Castle of Trakai. It's really cool. There's like a little village that you hop off on. They have some restaurants, they have a nice little old town with really beautiful painted wood houses. And then there's the Trakai Castle, which is an old Lithuanian castle that was built by some king at some point. Hard to remember. But it's got a big moat or lake around it. It's very specific looking, and you can actually rent a boat and you can go around the lake and see the castle, walk around, get a little bit of that Lithuanian history. And I believe you can actually take a train there or a bus, depends what you're interested in. But the train is cool because, you know, traveling by train, you get to see a little bit of the countryside, you get to feel the vibe of a normal Lithuanian, and it's a beautiful day trip, and I definitely recommend that one. I think Vilnius is a really good city. Up and coming, lots of cool stuff to do, pretty tasty food, lots of really good cultural things, and there's actually really good nature if you get out into the greater Lithuanian space, especially if you go to the Baltic coast. I would probably get there before the rest of the tourists of the world find out that this is such a cool, small city. That being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do go to Lithuania, drop a comment below. If you have any questions about a trip to Vilnius, also drop a comment below. If you want a one-on-one travel consult about a trip to the Baltic states, my email is in the YouTube channel. If not, just make sure to like and subscribe. That always helps me out. And I hope to see you in the next travel guide. Travel well, my friends.